my mother-in-law said, what I always used to say, teachers and preachers are like old shoes. The one thing that never wears out is the tongue. But I'll be sure to shorten it for us this morning. Just a personal note, I'm widowed. My wife passed away 2 years ago. But we were involved in the pro-life movement before Roe v. Wade because we could see what was coming, you know. And we're still involved in the pro-life movement. My wife's working now from heaven, and I'm still here. So we had 9 children and 38 grandchildren. So my last name, Haas, is Dutch for rabbit. So just trying to live up to our name, that's all. Now let me see if I can hit all the right buttons. It seems odd that we would have to have a program, what is an abortion, okay? I mean, we've been fighting about it, struggling over it for decades at this point. And, but it's a question that really has to be asked and was brought to the fore by the overthrow of Roe v. Wade and the Dobbs decision, which overthrew Roe v. Wade, actually has brought in a lot of confusion. One thing we have to realize is the Dobbs decision that overthrew Roe v. Wade was not a pro-life decision at all. I mean, it was a constitutional decision. It was based on the fact that there was nothing in the Constitution. The original framers of the Constitution had nothing to say with abortion, so they said this is inappropriate, and so Roe v. Wade was thrown out the window. But then suddenly we were cast into uncharted waters because for 50 years we worked within the framework that was set up by Roe v. Wade. So there was a whole patchwork of different state laws regulating abortion, but once Roe v. Wade was gone, that framework was gone. And so we actually have some situations where it's worse than it was before. Because there are 6 states now and Washington, D.C. that allow abortion all the way through pregnancy to the end of pregnancy. I mean, that's worse than it was before. But 14 states have laws banning almost all abortions. But it's a whole mixed bag out there now because you can see that it's allowed in some states after 6 weeks, after 12 weeks, after 15, after 18, after 22. So it gets very confusing and you have to figure out what's going on in your particular state. We can still hope. The most important thing is we work and struggle to develop a pro-life mindset, okay? Because back in 1856, well, goodness gracious, when I was a teenager, okay, I mean, abortion was universally against the law, okay? When I was a teenager growing up here in Pennsylvania, the sale and distribution of contraception was against the law. Can you believe that? I mean, this is how radically things have changed in such a short time. But we have to deal with the situation that we've been given, but it provides an opportunity for the pro-life cause. And as I say, what we have to do is change hearts, not write laws to deal with this situation and to provide protection for the unborn. So we have to make a distinction. I'm not a professor of jurisprudence of the legal system. I'm a professor of moral theology. And so we have to make a distinction between the law, what is legal and what is moral. Now, the laws of the land, of course, should reflect and be expressive of what we call the natural moral law. This is the law that's written in the hearts of all men and women. St. Paul talks about that in Romans, okay? Even those that don't have the law know what's right and what's wrong. It's an interesting expression of the natural moral law. I saw a newspaper article in the New York Times, front page article, and the headline said, the job in fertility clinics no one wants. Now, fertility clinics are in vitro fertilization clinics where they will engender 5 to 8 embryos, little human beings in a petri dish, and then they will implant 3, maybe 5 at the absolute most, and then the others are discarded or frozen for another attempt or just discarded altogether. So the headline was, the job at fertility clinics no one wants. Do you happen to know what it is? What's that?
Getting rid of the embryos?
Yeah, throwing out the excess embryos. Now, these fertility clinics are not manned by Catholics or Christians or pro-life people, but in their hearts, they knew that there is an inexpressible value of this little microscopic thing that's in the Petri dishes. That's an expression of the natural moral law that's built into all of us. And so we appeal to the natural moral law, saying that the laws of the state should reflect that, but we have to be realistic and know that we can't expect the legal requirements that regulate our lives together as a society to be as strict as moral demands. Okay? So the goal is to have laws as protective of human life as possible. Okay? So it's virtually impossible to have laws take into account all the factors that are necessary for a moral judgment, not a legal judgment. For example, as the president of the National Catholic Bioethics Center, we would sometimes go into Catholic hospitals to see if they were doing always the right thing. And one of the ways that we would look to determine that was we would see their procedural codes. Anything that takes place in a hospital, any kind of medical procedure has a code. Okay? There are thousands and thousands of them. And and they identify things like abortion. Okay? Well, there was a situation where a Catholic hospital was accused of doing abortions, and there was great demonstrations against the hospital and so forth. But when you looked at what the actual situation was that was called in the medical codes, that was called an abortion, it would have been morally licit according to the moral law. Okay, so you have to be careful about making a distinction between the moral law and the laws of the land, the positive laws, we call it. So we have problems with definitions, and that's what we're dealing with today. I mean, what is abortion? I mean, isn't that easy to define? Well, things are so fluid because very often the meaning of words is determined not by objective reality, but by the political agenda that people have in giving their meaning to the words that we're using. For example, conception. Everybody knows that conception occurs when the egg and sperm fuse together, right? We have a new human life, its own genetic code. It's interesting, again, that the Supreme Court in Dobbs says nothing about when human life begins. They make no commitment to that whatsoever. They just say Roe v. Wade was an unconstitutional law, right? And so that is thrown open again. However, in Germany, they're very precise about it. In Germany, they have something called the Embryonenschutzgesetz, translated, the embryo protection law. They actually have an embryo protection law in Germany, and this is the way they define a human being coming into existence, the moment of the fusion of the nuclei of the two gametes. I mean, that's how precise the German law is. And here in the United States, we can't, legally, we can't figure out, when life really begins. Of course we know when it begins. Okay, scientifically, that's when it begins. But everybody knows that, but in 1972, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists changed the definition of conception to the implantation of the blastocyst in the uterus. That's not conception, okay? But now the official organization, obstetricians and gynecologists, say conception begins at the time the blastocyst, the little embryo, attaches to the wall of the uterus. How much time is there between the conception of a new human being in the fallopian tube? Okay, you've got the ovaries, you got the fallopian tubes here, and you got the uterus. and conception takes place up here in the fallopian tube. From conception until it's implanted in the uterus, how many days? Yeah, about 5 days, about 5, 6, maybe 8 days. So the little baby makes his way down the fallopian tube, gets into the uterus, checks things out a little bit, and then settles into what's called the endometrium, or the lining of the uterus. So they have changed the definition of when conception takes place so that you can attack this little baby making its way down the fallopian tube because what hasn't been conceived yet, which of course is absolute nonsense. But this is, again, why we're here trying to figure out what an abortion is so we can deal with matters like this. So the consistent pro-life position, of course, is that we try to find as many protections for the child from the moment of conception, with conception being properly defined, right? So if conception is now known as the moment of the implantation of the blastocyst, that would allow for pharmacological abortions. Okay, Plan B, I don't know if you know what Plan B is. Okay, so if you have unprotected sex, and it's a terrible way to put it anyway, but the night before, that Plan A didn't work out because you were going to use some kind of contraceptive, so you fall back on Plan B, which is to take a pill the day after to prevent the implantation of a new child if it happens to be conceived, okay? So anyway, if the definition of conception is the moment of implantation, then that allows the use of Plan B or the morning after pill to address the destruction, if you will, of the not wanted child should it arise. So it may not be possible to enshrine in law all of our concerns. In fact, I can say right now, it won't be. And actually, since Dobbs, some states have passed laws that actually outlaw medical procedures that would be morally licit, okay? And then they've made them illegal. So we're going to have to work through this, and it's going to take a little bit of time. There was something called EMTALA, which was passed a few years ago, the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act. And it's a federal requirement that all hospitals have to screen and treat patients in emergency situations. This is if a woman came to an emergency room, she's in labor, the hospital is required by federal law to address that situation, and if they don't, they can lose Medicaid and Medicare. And if you lose that, you don't have health care. I mean, it's just that simple. So when that law was passed, there were many, many attempts to close down Catholic hospitals because they were saying, well, if a woman comes in a crisis situation already in labor and it's a crisis situation, the Catholic hospitals would not do an abortion, therefore they can't fulfill this federal law. Okay, I mean, it was a lie that was perpetrated to try to close down pro-life Catholic hospitals, basically. So we've had to battle this in court, but up to now we've been successful. So what is an abortion? So you may not know this, but the largest provider of health care in this country after the government is the Catholic Church. 1/6 of every hospital bed in this country is Catholic. And the bishops, in an attempt to oversee this vast ministry, have put together a code of ethics, if you will. It's called the Ethical and Religious Directives for Catholic Healthcare Services. There are about 75 do's and don'ts of what can be done and not done in Catholic hospitals. And obviously, one of these directives is going to deal with abortion. So let's see how the bishops have defined it. Abortion, that is the directly intended termination of pregnancy before viability. You all know what viability, if you're in this work, you have to. Or the directly intended destruction of a viable fetus is never permitted. Every procedure whose sole immediate effect is the termination of a pregnancy before viability is an abortion, which in its moral context, this is incredible here, includes the interval between conception, that is in the fallopian tube, and implantation of the uterus, of the fetus in the uterus. Catholic healthcare institutions are not to provide abortion services. In this context, Catholic healthcare institutions need to be concerned about the danger of scandal in any association with abortion providers. Now, I have something on here that makes it go backwards. Where is that? Oh, shoot.
Use the arrow back.
I can't see if there are too many buttons up here. Okay. Florian, please, where's the backward button? Oh, okay, very good. Yeah. I'm so technologically inept, it's a wonder I can answer a telephone. But anyway, so does anybody see any problem with this definition of abortion on the part of the U.S. bishops? Anybody see a problem with it? But it doesn't mention that topic, that's one thing. Well, there's one big problem with it, frankly. My wife had 9 terminations of pregnancy. I mean, every time one of our babies was born, guess what? It was a termination of pregnancy, right? So this is one of those fudge words, which isn't good and isn't helpful. I mean, the bishops, I mean, they have the right intent. They want to do the right thing. But you pick up the language that's around you, right, and can hardly express yourself unless you're using the general terminology of the day. So we'll have to look at that. There's another problem here in the rest of that directive. Anybody see a problem there? Is abortion ever a service? It's not a service to the unborn child. It's not a service to the mother, okay? Now, again, the bishops have to revise these ethical and religious directives all the time because times change. And they're in the process of revising these directives now, and I dare say we'll get this language cleaned up, okay, you know. So they'd have to say something like, are not to provide abortion procedures or just abortions, okay, in their institutions. So it's not a service. But as I say, there's need for improvement. Abortion is the direct killing of an individual human being, and one may never directly kill an unborn child. I mean, it's built into our very nature. That's why the workers in this fertility clinic didn't want to throw out the leftover embryos, okay, because they knew we can't directly kill a human being. But there might be situations where a medical procedure for the mother, which would be perfectly moral and legitimate, might endanger the life of the baby. So this woman's pregnant, she's going through chemotherapy, and the chemotherapy may actually endanger the life of the child. So what do you do? And all the time, we're faced with seemingly impossible choices, okay, when we have to find a way out because we have the moral norm that there's something we will never do, and yet if we're trying to do some good action, we see that something bad may come from it. And so there's something called the principle of double effect, which is the last bullet point there. And it's used when one wants to perform an act and one can foresee that the act that you're performing, the good act, will have a good effect, the one you want, but it's also going to have a bad effect. Okay. So if a pregnant woman shows up with her physician, she's pregnant, but she has advanced cancer of the uterus, what does one do? If the cancer is not removed, the woman may die, or very likely will die, or is going to die. And yet the removal of the cancerous uterus will mean the death of the baby. So what do you do? Now, the Catholic Church has developed a moral principle called the principle of double effect. It's not Catholic in the strict sense. It's an articulation of a moral principle based on common sense, okay? But we have articulated it probably most precisely and effectively than any other institution out there. So the principle of double effect works like this. You're contemplating the performance of an act. You see it will have two effects, one good and one bad. May I still go ahead and do that act? And the answer is yes, if certain conditions are met, okay? You may still go ahead and posit that act, perform that act, but the act itself must be good. Okay? The other thing is you can't achieve the good that you want through the bad effect. Okay? Third, the good effect can't be brought about by the bad effect. So you can only intend the good effect, not the bad that you foresee. The good effect can't be brought about by the bad effect. And there has to be proportionality between the good effect that you're bringing about and the bad effect that you foresee. And then there has to be no other choice. So if we look at the poor woman with the cancerous, pregnant woman with the cancerous uterus, the act itself must be good. In this case, you're removing a pathology, you're removing the cancer. One does not intend the death of the baby at all. The only thing one intends is the removal of the cancer. However, one foresees the death of the baby. The death of the baby doesn't bring about the cure of the cancer, okay? That's foreseen. So you're not doing something bad to get to a good end. There's proportionality because two lives are involved, and in this case, you've got no other choice. Any questions on that? The outline of the principle?
So, for example, the example of
That was heroic. She could have had the option. But you always have to look at the extenuating circumstance. You have to look at all the circumstances that are involved in a case like that. But yes, that would have been heroic action on her part, and one of the reasons she's a saint, right? You know, but thank you, Pete. That's a good point. So the ethical religious directives have a directive that addresses this situation. Very helpful to you people out there in the pro-life movement and charting the waters after Dobbs. Okay. Directive 47 says, operations, treatments, and medications that have as their direct purpose the cure of a proportionately serious pathological condition of a pregnant woman are permitted when they cannot be safely postponed until the unborn child is viable, even if they will result in the death of the child. But these procedures are not killing the child. Okay, for example, the removal of the cancerous uterus, that's not killing the child. The death of the child is foreseen, but that's not what you were doing. So these are referred to as an indirect abortion rather than a direct abortion. I don't like using the word abortion at all here because it's not really an abortion. Okay, it's whatever the medical procedure is that you're performing is what that act is. Okay, and then you foresee the unintended and unfortunate death of the child. So one of the most powerful voices, pro-life voices, in my lifetime was Pope John Paul II. He wrote a powerful encyclical called The Gospel of Life. And if you haven't read it, I implore you, read it. I mean, it is so powerful. I've never read a papal encyclical that was as powerful as it. So he's talking about the absolute moral demand on all of us never to directly take an innocent human life. And he tells us in the encyclical, look, speak the truth. This is kind of a long quote, but he says the acceptance of abortion in the popular mind, in behavior, and even in law itself is a telling sign of an extremely dangerous crisis of the moral sense, which is becoming more and more incapable of distinguishing between good and evil, even when the fundamental right to life is at stake. And that's what Father was talking about in terms of the wiles of the devil. You know, he wants to have it just become so commonplace we don't even see the evil of it anymore. The Pope goes on, given such a grave situation, we need now more than ever to have the courage to look the truth in the eye and to call things by their proper name. Okay, like when conception occurs, it's not an implantation. Let's call things by their name without yielding to the convenient compromises or the temptation of self-deception. Especially in the case of abortion, there is a widespread use of ambiguous terminology, such as interruption of pregnancy. And here the bishops in the United States themselves had fallen victim to that, not meaning to. The widespread use of ambiguous terminology, such as interruption of pregnancy, which tends to hide abortion's true nature and to attenuate its seriousness in public opinion. Perhaps this linguistic phenomenon is itself a symptom of an uneasiness of conscience. So he actually sees some hope in the fact that we're using ambiguous language to cover up what abortion really is. Why do we do that? Because we have an uneasy conscience about what we're doing, okay? All these pro-choice people out there are using the term pro-choice because they know that what they're advocating, they know in their own hearts that what they're advocating is wrong, is bad, and they know darn well that the broader general population will know that as well because of the natural law that is within all of us. He goes on, but no word has the power to change the reality of things. Procured abortion is the deliberate and direct killing by whatever means it is carried out of a human being in the initial phase of his or her existence, extending from conception to birth. The moral gravity of procured abortion is apparent in all its truth if we recognize that we're dealing with murder, okay? I mean, he didn't mince words. I mean, let's call it by name, right? So we still have struggles with the definition of abortion. People will talk about spontaneous abortions. A much better name for it is miscarriage, okay, than a spontaneous abortion, because it's not an abortion at all in the sense in which we're talking about it. This can be physically and emotionally very, very painful for the woman, brought about by abnormalities in the developing child or problems with the gestational process, but it's not an abortion, okay, it's a miscarriage. And it's interesting, if you go to the Merck manual, which is a medical, Merck is a pharmaceutical firm, and they have a manual of technical terms talking about the non-induced embryonic or fetal death or passage of products of conception. How do you like that for the child? Products of conception before 20 weeks gestation. I mean, no mention of a child or what we're actually dealing with here. Now, in the attempts to make direct abortion, real abortion, more palatable, there are some jurisdictions in this country that keep medical records, which are critically important for public health, right? They won't make a distinction between a spontaneous abortion and an induced abortion, right? An induced abortion is wrong. It's a direct killing of the innocent human being. A miscarriage, that's a spontaneous abortion, that comes about because of problems that I've just mentioned. They are so driven by ideology that they will put public health at risk. Because if you're keeping track of abortions in a given county in Louisiana, and there's been a tremendous increase in miscarriages, and they're not distinguishing between induced abortion and spontaneous abortions, there could be a grave public health risk going on here that they're not even going to investigate because they've so misused the terminology for their own ideological purposes. Okay. So prenatal conflicts appear all the time, okay? And we have to look at how they're dealt with. And in the past, most regrettably, the quick answer was an abortion, right? So, so we're looking at possible situations of conflict, so that the treatment for the mother will harm or risks harming the unborn baby, or a treatment for one of the unborn twins that might harm or risk harming the other twin, such as twin-to-twin fetal transfusion syndrome. That's where they're both drawing on the same blood supply, and will kill them if that's not addressed. Or a treatment for the unborn baby will harm or risks harming the mother. So unfortunately, we encounter these kinds of medical risks all the time. But if we look at these, what do all those situations have in common? Okay, we're talking about two or more patients, okay, not just one patient. So one cannot treat one patient without involving the other patient, and a treatment that will benefit one of the patients may likely burden the other patient. And again, these kinds of situations were usually dealt with by the principle of double effect, like the shared blood supply of the twins. You have to find some way of correcting that surgically to save the life. And you might, one of the babies might die, but you can't kill one of the twins as you're attempting to solve this problem. Now, ectopic pregnancy is one of the biggest ones that we have to deal with because it's not all that uncommon. Ectopic means simply out of place, okay? It's Greek, ex topos, it's not in the right place. And so that's one of the medical complications that we face. We'll deal with that in a little bit. There are others: placenta previa, premature rupture of membranes, preeclampsia, eclampsia, pulmonary hypertension, which is when the blood pressure gets so high that the woman can die from it because of the stress put on the heart and the lungs. There are maternal complications like gestational diabetes, chorioamnionitis, which is the infection of the amniotic fluid, maternal sepsis, maternal cancer, peripartum cardiomyopathy. That's what we were just talking about, cardiomyopathy. I mean, it's incredible what mothers put themselves through to bring a new life into this world. I mean, I said we had 9 children, and I was just in awe of my wife. You know, I'd want to kiss the ground she walked on. I mean, mothers put themselves at all of these risks to bring a new life into the world. And if they're that committed to bringing new life into the world, I mean, who are we to try to deny that and destroy it in the womb? But these are all risks that mothers face, and virtually every single one of them, they all, today, thanks be to God, in the United States, can be dealt with medically. But let's look at ectopic pregnancy, and I say it's out of place. Usually an ectopic pregnancy occurs in the fallopian tube. So the little baby's making its way down the fallopian tube, and as it was fertilized, and gets stuck in there. And the most common place for it is right here, the second most common here, and the third there. But what do? If you don't do something, the baby's going to grow and grow and grow, and the fallopian tube's going to explode, and the mother dies, and the baby dies. Okay? In the attempt to pass some pro-life laws, they weren't making provision for something like an ectopic pregnancy and how we deal with it. An ectopic pregnancy can also occur in the abdominal cavity, for example. And there have been cases where a woman has actually carried a baby to term in the abdominal cavity if it was very, very carefully nurtured and monitored, okay? So it can be done, but not in the fallopian tube because the tube will explode, and as I say, both will die. Again, the ethical religious directives say in the case of extrauterine pregnancy, no intervention is morally licit, which constitutes a direct abortion, but then we have to see what's a direct abortion and what do we do to address this kind of situation, okay? So there are, you've all heard of an appendectomy, right, when you get your appendix taken out. Well, there's something called a salpingectomy, and that's where you got the baby in the fallopian tube, you cut out a section of the fallopian tube, or take the whole fallopian tube out, okay, because it's damaged. So you're removing the damaged section of the fallopian tube, or you're removing a damaged fallopian tube. That's the medical procedure that's licit, legitimate, and the child might die as a result of that procedure. Another is salpingostomy, where you slice a little hole in the fallopian tube and pluck the embryo out. Now, most would hold that that would be illicit because it's a direct assault upon the life of the child. Another method is to use methotrexate, which is actually a cancer drug. But because it's a cancer drug, it attacks rapidly dividing cells in the body, okay? And when the trophoblast has connected to the uterine wall or whatever, or in this case, the fallopian tube, the cells of the trophoblast are developing very, very rapidly, so methotrexate attacks those developing cells, and cases have been made, there's disagreement among moral theologians on this, because methotrexate is attacking the developing cells of the trophoblast, is that a direct or an indirect abortion? I would say methotrexate is probably the medical procedure that's most commonly used because it preserves the fertility of the woman. So the, okay, I've got one more minute to keep to your schedule.
So I was under the understanding that mechanisms of methotrexate is, in line with the abortion bill. So why is that not a direct abortion?
Well, I think it is, but I'm just letting you know there's debate on it. And one of the reasons there's debate on it is because the abortion pill attacks the child itself, and some have made the claim that the chorionic villi that are attaching to the uterine wall aren't the baby itself. Okay, and so it's attacking those cells, which are the most rapidly developing ones. Okay, but I happen to agree with the other position. I'm just letting you know that there's divided opinion on that. There's premature rupture of membranes, which is dangerous for the mother and the child. So this is when the water breaks too early on. Delivery may have begun. It can usually be managed. Okay, usually, I mean, if you're in a pro-choice, abortion-minded situation. They don't think anything of getting the child out. But usually it can be managed through bed rest and being very careful about monitoring the condition of the woman. But if suddenly there's a spike in her temperature and an infection has set in, then the amniotic fluid has become infected and will kill both mother and child. And in a case like that, we say that we can remove the infected amniotic fluid from the uterus, because it's, again, the principle of double effect is applied. But you can't do it unless an infection is about to destroy both of them, and then it's an evacuation of the uterus of the infected amniotic fluid. Your intent is not to take the baby out. So early induction of labor would be applied in a situation like this. I'm going to jump over these very quickly. These are all types of abortion that would not lend themselves to the principle of double effect because they are all assaults on the baby itself. Okay, so you can't claim that these are merely procedures that you can perform to save the life of the mother, because what's the first condition of the principle of double effect? Anybody remember? The first condition of the principle of double effect. Well, the act itself that you're performing has to be good. The act itself you're performing has to be moral. So all those procedures that I've just mentioned, like dilation, curettage, and evacuation, are assaults on the baby. They're killing the baby. They're dismembering the baby and pulling the baby out piece by piece by piece. So the first condition of the principle of double effect isn't met. So you can't apply the principle of double effect to situations like these, right? So they cannot be morally justified. I always think this is kind of interesting in that if you're doing an early induction abortion, which is sometimes done, labor will be induced. Sometimes it's induced using oxytocin, which gets the whole process moving. And it's always struck me that these good things that God has given us can be used for good or evil, okay? So oxytocin, for example, is produced in the hypothalamus in the back of the brain. It's released by the pituitary gland. It plays a role in behavior such as social bonding between the mother and the child after she's had the child. It's released during sexual activity, and it's wholesome for the mother as it is. And it plays this key role in maternal bonding and milk production. It helps suppress ovulation so that you can use it to naturally space and morally space your children. All good and beautiful things that God's worked into this. But you can also use it to kill a baby. So we have to make sure that God's gifts are being properly used. And let me just say a final word now and finish up with the abortion pill. It's not really an abortion pill. As you know, it's abortion pills. Okay. First is, oh shoot. I told you, I'm so technologically inept, it's a wonder I can answer a telephone. But, but I'll go ahead and tell you anyway. There are two pills that are taken. One's mifepristone, and that kills the baby. Then you have to take another one, and that begins the induction of labor to expel the baby. Now, to me, it's unbelievable that now this can be procured in the mail, over the counter. It always required a doctor's prescription because the condition of the mother might be such that it could be highly dangerous for her, and it is, right? And so what happens, you've killed the baby, it's in your uterus, you have to get it out, so you take this other pill, it begins induction of labor, begins the labor, and where's the baby come out? The woman's in cramps, she's in pain, she's bleeding, she's sitting on the toilet, and she sees her baby in the toilet after it's been expelled. Can you imagine the trauma, the emotional trauma, or the baby's expelled while she's in bed, bloodied sheets? It's awful. And yet in this country, it's like mail order. There are going to be lawsuits over this that will really bring this down and bring down the pharmaceutical industry and companies that are making this available. Britney Spears, anybody ever hear of Britney Spears? Okay, well, she recently wrote an autobiography. Yeah, I don't read too many autobiographies about singers and stars and stuff like that. But she recounts in her autobiography she had a medical abortion like that. And she said it was one of the most horrific things that she had ever experienced. So if in your ministry, it might not be a bad idea for you to pick up Britney Spears' autobiography and just familiarize that with that section so you can share that with others. Okay, so we started a little late, and I'll stop, but I will entertain some questions if you want.
So we've had college students be given the abortion pill by local Planned Parenthoods, and they're just sent them to their dorms to deliver the baby in
awful.
the dorm rooms.
It's unbelievable. I mean, it really is. Am I back on target? Well, sort of. Now there is, and you might want to look into this. There's a pill that, if you take it quickly enough, I mean, if a woman has taken mifepristone, the first pill, and she has a change of heart, there's a pill that can stop that process that's killing the unborn baby. So it's controversial still how much medical data can you gather from these kinds of situations at this point. But there are advocates out there of using it as abortion reversal pills. Yeah. So, okay, thank you.